How's it going, guys? So today we'll be doing the last video of the 10K mile service series. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are now available for you if you have not seen those yet. Go ahead and click on the links down below, and there will be a link in the upper right corner here. So today we're going to be we're going to inspect the rear brake pads and disc for wear. And actually today, we're going to be changing them. We're going to check the front axle nut torque. We're going to check the brake banjo bolt torque. We're going to inspect and lubricate the jiffy stand. We're going to inspect the drive belt and sprockets and adjust the belt if necessary. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with the front brake pads. And to do this process, you're going to need some DOT4 fluid. Now note that I have ABS. If you don't have ABS, the process is going to be somewhat similar, but note that it may be a little bit differently because I have additional components. So what I want to do is I just want to take a little bit of fluid out of the reservoir, because once we take the pads out, we're going to be pushing those calipers back in. Fluid's going to start coming up. You don't want a whole bunch to come out. So I just want to take out just enough so I don't get any air in the system. Just in case it does come up over, I want to protect the bike. So I'm gonna wrap this towel around the handlebars, this one on the tank, and this one on the fender. So I'm just gonna start by removing the top cover of the reservoir, and then I'm gonna see how much fluid is in there, and I'm gonna remove just a little bit if necessary. So that's pretty full, so I'm gonna take quite a bit out. And you can use a lot of different things. You can use a small syringe. You're not taking that much out, 5-7 mils maybe. I'm gonna use this large syringe plunger thing that I got off eBay for about 10 bucks or so. Does the trick. Now you're not gonna save any of this because you get air into the system if you try to reuse this. That's why I have a fresh bottle. So I'm gonna go ahead and recycle this along with my oil. And that's probably good right there. Hopefully when I push the calipers in, not too much will come up. All right, next we're gonna go ahead and take off the caliper. Now again, I have ABS, so the sensor is right here. Just be careful with the sensor if you have ABS as well. And it's a 10 millimeter 12-point socket. All right, I'm already starting to feel the caliper come loose. And again, just be careful if you have ABS, just be careful with the speed sensor there. Now it's okay to leave the caliper hang down like this, but just don't be too aggressive with it. Don't let it swing around, don't yank on it, just be careful with it. All right, so next we want to get the pads out of here. So we're going to remove this pin right here, and they should slide right out. It is an 8 millimeter hex to remove this pin. Now I found it a lot easier to remove this pin if you have the caliper still bolted onto the bike. Comes loose nicely. Once you get it loose, then you can take the caliper back off. Now I didn't put these bolts in very tight, just put it in tight enough to give me the leverage to get that pin loose. Just finger tight. And I'll loosen the pin the rest of the way. Now you might need to move the pads around a little bit just to get this pin out of here a little bit. If you have 12,000 miles on your bike like I do, it's gonna be a little bit dry. And sometimes it might be so dry that a pair of pliers might be necessary. There we go. There's one. The backing of the pad's a little stuck to the pin. There we go, and the pin's out. We will clean this off and lube this up before we put it back in. But first, the reason why we took a little bit of fluid out of the reservoir is so we can push these pistons back in. New pads are gonna be a little bit thicker if we need to go with new pads. So what we wanna do now is measure the old pads and see if we could still use them, and if not, clean this up and then put new pads in. All right, so now I'm just gonna spray the caliper with some brake clean, and this is some pretty nasty shit, so I am gonna wear gloves and glasses while I do this, and hold it far enough away. And I'll just let that sit there for a bit while I check out the pads. Now to be able to continue to use pads, the pad portion above the backing plates, so just the usable braking surface area, should be no thinner than 1.02 millimeters, or for those of us in the United States, 0.04 inches. So I've got a digital caliper here that I'll use, and I have it set to millimeters. So I'll go ahead and measure the pad above the brake plate surface. And I can see that this one is at 2.60 millimeters. So there's still some life left in this, but I'm just about to go on a trip. That's probably gonna take me about 5,000 miles. So it's probably a good idea to change these now. Let me take a look at the other one. Yeah, this one is at 2.95. Still some life left in this, but probably not enough to go on a 5,000 mile trip over 4 weeks. So I'm gonna change this. Just gonna clean it up a little bit in there, get that grime out. All right, now I want to push these calipers back in, but I don't want to use the new pads to do it, and I don't want to just push on the calipers because I want them to go in evenly. So I'm going to put the old pads back in here. And I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver to push the calipers back in. And I'm actually going to do this by watching the fluid level to make sure that it doesn't come up over the top. Like that. Be very careful. All right, so I got the pistons pushed back in here. Just a little bit of fluid squirted out, not a whole lot except for on that first one. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put the new pads in. For my replacement pads, I'm going with EBC Brakes, the double H sintered one. The part number for this is FA640HH. If you buy these online, make sure that you get the one with this code that's specifically designed for your brakes. It took me a little bit to figure out which ones I needed because some very popular websites that sell bike parts did not have the right ones, even though they labeled them as the correct ones. So it took me a little bit to figure out exactly what I needed. Now, the reason why I went with these is because I've read some good reviews of them. The sintered pads, the EBCs, are some of the best ones on the market. Supposedly they'll work a little bit better than the OEM ones, and honestly, these were a lot cheaper. These front brakes I've paid $43. These are made in the USA, and I've read a lot of good reviews of them. So I'm gonna give them a try. So before I put these in, I'm gonna do something that seems a little counterintuitive, but I am gonna put some caliper grease on the backing plate. Smokey Toki, if you're watching now, this is what I'm going to be using to prevent that brake squeal. I haven't had any brake squeal on my front brakes, but oh boy. From mile one, after buying my Harley Iron 883, my brakes in the back were squeaking. So I'm gonna just go ahead and put them on the front, and when I do the rear ones as well. All you have to do is just spread a little bit of this on the backing plate. Just take your finger and just spread it over the backing plate. This will help prevent that squeaky noise. So what's happening is the backing plate is actually standing up and singing once it's making contact with the calipers. It's akin to a violin bow stroking over a string, or Jimmy Page playing his guitar with his violin bow. And I'll do it to both pads. Now you want to make sure you only get this on the backing plate. You don't want any of the caliper grease on the pads themselves or inside the caliper. So I'm actually going to change these gloves to make sure that doesn't happen. Oh, and before I do that, I'm actually going to put a little bit of caliper grease on the pin. Brake pads definitely have a way to go. So you want to make sure the backing plate is towards the pistons on the inside one, and the backing plate is towards the outside. And using my thumb, I'll hold the top of it and I'll push it down so I can push the caliper pin through. Now that we got the pads lined up, we'll go ahead and tighten the pin. Now the pin should be tightened to 131 to 171 inch-pounds. All right, next we'll push this rear pad, rear as I'm looking at it. Once it's on the bike, it's gonna be the left side pad. I'm gonna go ahead and push it all the way back and then put it onto the rotor here. And then I'll line up the ABS sensor. All right, these mounting bolts here, the caliper mounting bolts, 28 to 38 foot-pounds torque. There's the top one and the bottom one. Because we removed fluid, we're gonna go ahead and add some here so it's all topped off. You don't want air to get in the system at all, so you want to use a fresh bottle that does not have air in it. Now I did spill a little bit of brake fluid right here. I'm gonna clean that up. A quick tip that I learned from my mountain biking days when I would replace my hydraulic brake fluid is when you spill it, go ahead and spray a little bit of isopropyl alcohol spray on it. That will help neutralize it and prevent any paint from getting screwed up. And of course, wipe it off right away. Now, for one of the most important steps of all, you don't want to just get on the bike and ride now thinking everything's all set. You're going to notice that because those pistons are pushed all the way in, that you're going to grab a handful of lever and it's going to be pretty loose. So you want to make sure you push that fluid back down. So I'm going to squeeze the lever until it gets tight. And there it's starting to get tight. And that feels pretty good. There we go. I'm also going to check the sight glass just to make sure my level's not too low, and that looks pretty good too. Now after squeezing the lever for a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and open up the top. I'm going to open up the reservoir cover and check the level. Now the reason why I'm not just using the reservoir sight glass is because the sight glass should only be used to see if it's low. And the sight glass should only be used to see how low the level might be. Don't use the sight glass to determine if it's topped off. You need to open up the cover for that. And I'm just going to put a touch more in there, not much. Okay, that's perfect. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put the cover on. There might be a little bit of air in the system from this process, so what I'll do is I'll zip tie this tonight after I go out on a test ride. What that does is that forces air up and out of the system by having this squeezed tightly with a zip tie. And I'll go ahead and do that tonight to force that air out. All right, now it's time to do the rear. The rear is a little bit more complicated. Let's get started. All right, just like the master cylinder in front, we're gonna go ahead and remove a little bit of fluid. This one's a lot easier to avoid getting on paint, but the brake linkage is here along with the foot peg and also my exhaust. It's still not good if you get brake fluid all over that, so I'm definitely gonna cover it up. All right, you see here, this is gonna be a little bit more of a challenge because the caliper is behind the shock here. So the first step is to loosen the shock, get the shock bottom part undone, get it out of the way so you can get at the caliper. All right, so to start, I wanna go ahead and loosen the tension on the shock. All right, now I want to take a little bit of weight off the shock by putting the wheel down a little bit. You notice I have the bike balanced. Just want the wheel down a little bit. So there's a little bit of pressure off this so I can get the shock off. And it's a T55 to get the lower mounting shock bolt undone. I also need a 14mm wrench on the other side to hold this nut in place while I undo the bolt. And just so I can move it about, I'm going to loosen the top one as well. Just a touch, just so it can move like this. And so I don't lose the mounting bolt, I'm going to go ahead and put it inside the shock. So now you can see I've got the shock out of the way, so I have direct access to the caliper. And just like the front, it is a 12-point 10mm socket to get these mounting bolts off. But before I do that, I'm going to loosen the pin so it's easier to loosen while it's connected to the bike. And you heard that loud click. The pin is loose now, so it'll be a lot easier once I get this caliper off here. Now, the rear one's a little different. It's got a single caliper on either side, whereas the front one was 2 calipers on one side. And what I'm gonna do first, just like last time, I'm gonna go ahead and push in these pistons. And none came up. That's pretty good. Up better than the front one. And I'm gonna go ahead and clean this out a bit. It's not really dirty at all, so I don't need to clean out a whole lot. All right, measuring one pad, and I got 2.43. So that's millimeters. So a little bit of life left. But again, I'm gonna be going on a 5,000 mile trip over 4 weeks. Definitely not enough to carry me through that trip, so I'm definitely gonna replace these pads. So just like the front, I also got the EBC Double H sintered brakes. The product code for this is FA254HH. One thing that I did neglect to mention with the front brakes, and I'll mention now with the rear brake pads, your brake pads are very telling for anything unusual. Look for signs of unusual wear. So if there's too much wear on one side of a brake pad more than the other, something's off kilter with your caliper. Same thing with if there's too much wear with one pad and a different amount of wear with the other one, something's not working right with your pistons. So go ahead and check your pistons to make sure they're the same height. So let's go ahead and put the new ones in. All right, so just like with the front, we're gonna go ahead and put caliper grease on the backing plates here. Just enough to spread it around so they don't squeal. Smoky Toki, this is the key. This should help reduce or eliminate that noise. Again, I don't want to get any of this on the brake pads themselves, so I'm going to change my gloves. All right, this is one of those jobs that requires 6 hands. All right, so the caliper pad spring goes on top here. Go ahead and put the first one in, and we'll put a little bit of caliper grease on the pin. All right, so I got the pads in. Again, the pin should be torqued to 131 to 171 inch-pounds. All right, these caliper bolts should be torqued to 28 to 38 foot-pounds. There's the first one, and the second one. So for wheel alignment, Harley sells this $20 tool that's basically the equivalent of a metal rod. I don't feel like paying 20 bucks for that. In fact, I think I have a better solution. What some other riders do is they grab an old metal coat hanger and they bend it into the shape of the Harley tool. But metal coat hangers are really hard to come by now. Most coat hangers now are made out of plastic. So that wasn't an option for me. Thought about going to Home Depot and buying the size rod that I needed, but I thought I have a much better solution. So what I'm gonna use is a digital caliper. So basically how this works is on the swing arm, there is a hole here and the axle is here. You want to measure the distance from this hole to the axle on both sides of the bike. If you see over here on the other side of the bike, there's a hole here and the axle's here. These distances need to be the same. But to start, I want to get this rear wheel set up so I can make adjustments. So I'm going to lift the bike up a little bit. So I'm going to use my digital caliper. I'm going to use this digital caliper and measure the distance from this hole in the swing arm to the axle. And what's great is with this caliper, not only do these points here fit perfectly inside the axle, but also inside that hole in the swing arm. And with this little dial here, I can lock it up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure this side, and right now, it is set at 67.66 millimeters. Let's go ahead and check the other side. So you can see it's just shy of that, so I just need to make a minor adjustment. So how I'm gonna adjust that is there are two bolts, one on the left side of the bike, and then one on the right side of the bike here. I'm gonna start by loosening the axle, so this has a little bit of play here so I can start moving these back. First I'll take off the just in case C-clamp. Go, set that aside. And the axle nut's a behemoth. It's a 36 millimeter nut, torqued to 95 to 105 foot-pounds. There we go, that wasn't too hard. All right, I think I got that loose enough. All right, so these bolts on the end here, both on either side, are turned with a 1/2 inch wrench. So I want to go in, so I'm going to go clockwise. And I'm only going to go a 1/4 turn, and then I'm going to see where we're at. It's closer, let me see on the other side. Now the goal here is to just get the wheel perfectly aligned. Doesn't matter what this measures out to be, just as long as they're the same distance on either side. All right, so now after a bit of finagling on either side, getting it just right with the caliper, it's 68.24 on this side millimeters and 68.24 on this side. Now, I don't want to move anything. I want to keep the axle nut loose, but I want to make sure I don't move these at all because it's perfectly aligned. Now I want to move on to adjusting the belt. But first, it's a pallet jack IPA kind of day. So with the belt now, by aligning the rear wheel, I've changed the tension in the belt because I'm moving that wheel forward or backwards depending on how I need to align it. As you can see right now, it's pretty tight. What a lot of riders do is they adjust the belt just by feel. I've only done this 2 times before, so I'm not too comfortable with doing it by feel. So Harley makes a tool that's similar to this. This is a belt tension gauge. I think Harley's is $20. I paid $15 for this one at Amazon. This is the exact same tool that Harley has. I'll be using this one. So basically how this works, it's got some rubber washers on here. This bottom washer here is marked at 10 pounds. I don't know how well you can see this, but on the lower belt guard, I'm not sure how well you can see this, but on the lower belt guard, there is a belt deflection window. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this tension gauge, I'm gonna push it to this 10-pound mark so I can deflect the belt. And when I push up on this and the belt deflects upwards, it should be between the 4th and 5th mark on the deflection window. Each one of these marks, or deflection graduation as Harley calls them, is 1/16 of an inch. For the belt to be in spec, it's got to be between 1/4 and 5/16 of an inch. So the equivalent of 1/4 is 4/16. So based on that, it has to be between the 4th and 5th mark to be in spec. Make sense? All right, let's go ahead and do this. All right, so I'll put the tool on the belt, push up with my hand to the 10-pound mark, and right now the belt's so tight, it's only deflecting to just under the 2nd graduation mark. So that means we need to loosen tension on this belt. We already have the rear wheel in alignment, so we don't want to change one side without changing the other. Here's how we're gonna do that. To loosen tension on the belt, we need to loosen these screws on the left and the right. Again, we're gonna use our 1/2 inch wrench. All right, to loosen these screws and to loosen belt tension, I'm gonna turn each one of these on the left and the right side of the swing arm counterclockwise, but I'm gonna turn them the exact same amount so the wheel still stays in alignment. So, counterclockwise, I'm gonna do small movements. So I'm gonna do, on the right side, a quarter turn, counterclockwise. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the left side, just a quarter turn. And then I'm gonna go ahead and check belt tension again. All right, with 10 pounds pushed on the deflection gauge, I am now between the 4th and 5th deflection graduation. So this belt now is in spec. All right, I just need to button everything up now by tightening the axle nut and torquing it to 95 to 105 foot-pounds, and then putting the just in case C-clamp on there. There we go, it's all tightened down. Now for the C-clamp. All right, so we just have a few more things to cover before finishing the 10K mile service series. Right now we're gonna be tightening the front axle nut, and that should be torqued to 60 to 65 foot-pounds. There we go. All right, next we're gonna check the torque on all the banjo bolts. There's 4 of them that we need to check. So the one on the front brake master cylinder, the one on the front caliper, there's one on the rear master cylinder right here, and there's one on the rear caliper right here. And each one of these banjo bolts will be tightened with a 12mm socket, and they all should be torqued to 14 to 18 foot-pounds. All right, next I'll check and lube the jiffy stand. The pin is in okay, the spring looks pretty good, but it's just a little squeaky, so I'm gonna lubricate it a little bit. Squeak is now gone. I'm gonna kind of miss that squeak. It's been with me for a good 5,000 miles. All right, so that's it for the 10K service series. This was the 4th and final video in the series, and I got everything done. And I wanted to make sure I got everything done before the Route 66 trip starts, and it's starting in 3 days, man. 3 days from now, I will be heading out from Chicago to Santa Monica. So if you're interested in the Route 66 video series at all, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. I also have a lot of other great videos similar to this one, service videos, but I also enjoy talking about life and philosophy on a Harley. And I've got a lot of great stories while I'm motovlogging. So if you're interested in any of that, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. And of course, click on that bell icon so you know when I upload videos just like this one and just like the other ones I just described. If you have a friend who you know would benefit from watching these service videos, go ahead and share it with him or her. If you like this video, of course, go ahead and click on that like button. It helps out this channel.